Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for attending today's panel webinar, The Future of the Financial Desktop. Before we get started, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with all of you. Just so you know, there will be time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom meeting, or you can chat to the host or the panelists and we'll get your questions answered. We are recording today's session. I'll be sending out a follow-up email with a copy of the recording. It will also be posted on Expero's website. And if you have any questions or issues during the webinar, please feel free to message me, the host. I am Expero Internal, and we hope you enjoy today's presentation. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our team of panelists.
Cool, thanks, Laura. Welcome everyone today. There's a few of us who will be talking about what we think is happening on the finance desktop based on our own experiences over these many years. There's four of us here today. I'm Sebastian, I'm the CEO of Expero. Chuck is the president and CIO of OpenFin, a company that probably needs very little introduction if you are interested in the financial desktop. Tim Baker has done about a half a dozen of everything, most recently at IEX Cloud, and he's now an advisor at Blue Sky Thinking, fantastic forward-thinking entrepreneur in this space. And Ravi is a friend and a customer at a little boutique shop you may or may not have heard of called IHS Market that dabbles in a few pieces of software and data. So thanks you guys for joining us. Looking forward to it. For people that have joined and wonder who Expero is, forgive me for a 30-second introduction. We are a company that helps build products for expert users. So we help people build software and data products. We do analytics work. We work across a number of industries, but we have a big presence, a big excitement for the world of finance, where we've worked in banking, capital markets, and insurance. We're very excited to be an OpenFin partner, especially because today is a desktop conversation. I want to mention that. So a lot of our work is on the trading floor, in the middle office, compliance. We do work around financial crimes. We don't commit the crimes, we help people fight the crimes. I always like to make that extremely clear. With some of our own software we call Expero Connected, which is an analytics platform for highly complex connected data across different industries. So we're coming at this from a perspective of having been a practitioner in this space for the last couple of decades and helping people build and modernize a lot of software here. And I introduced our participants. We've all had our hands on this elephant of building apps that don't stink for users as our industry changes underneath us. So I wanted to invite Tim to kind of ground this conversation. He's written a really nice blog on this that I hope you guys can read. Tee this up for us, Tim. Why are we talking about the future of the finance desktop?
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian. Yeah, so just that blog's on the Expero Inc. Website. So we'll follow that format to an extent, but I'm sure we'll veer off in different areas. It took me a while, by the way, to find this photograph. This is the original Bloomberg terminal. This isn't the future of the desktop. This is the history of the desktop. It was really long before PCs and the internet were ubiquitous. So I vaguely remember when this came out. I was in the FX markets. I was using a product called Telerate, if anyone can remember that. And at the time, Telerate and Reuters Art were the dominant players. And this upstart Bloomberg came into the market and really took the market by storm. Oddly enough, I think Bloomberg users, is about 350,000 of them, still like to have that kind of custom keyboard with shortcuts and what have you. It's a classic bundled product. And for the first several years, the hardware connectivity was also bundled with it, along with market data, news, charting, messaging came along. And of course, today, it's still very much the gorilla in the room. It's the all-you-can-eat product, and it's very much considered the premium product out there. So clearly, the world has changed, and users have an incredible array of sources of data and applications at their fingertips. I think I picked up from the FinJS event in London that you hosted, Chuck, that the average user in financial services is logging to about 40 applications. You'll see a few photographs through the deck today of desktops like this. The solution has been very much new application, add another screen. in my blog post, I had a go at organizing some of the key challenges and drivers, and they're kind of in three areas. The first is, where we're seeing the explosion in these specialized applications on the desktop. Secondly, where we're seeing an explosion in the amount and variety and veracity and volume of data that's being thrown at users, sometimes through these applications, but often through other mechanisms. We'll talk about those. And finally, where the more general desktop applications have become ubiquitous on the desktop and being very often the Band-Aids to a lot of the gaps and issues across the desktop. So firstly, the applications, we'll hear this word a lot, are very siloed. They're very locked down. Even the data within the bigger bundled applications like Bloomberg are hard to liberate, and data is often locked behind the glass in this very kind of siloed way. Even data within a bundled product is difficult to kind of interoperate and combine. And as you can see from the photo, the look and feel is hardly standardized. Lots of different types of grids and charts, all looking and functioning in quite different ways. A recent survey that Refinitiv put out, which is my old shop, showed that 82% of customers said that they wanted better ways to liberate and combine data. And by better, I mean faster and with fewer errors. So this all leaves the end user experience in a pretty poor state. Users are like frogs in a pond, leaping from lily pad to lily pad, application to application, cutting and pasting as they go, writing bits of VBA. It's a bit of a mess. Next slide. So the second big set of challenges relates to the explosion in data, and that, if anything, it's not just the explosion in data, it's how that data is delivered. If you're on the buy side, this might take the form of alternative data, for example. There are 150 sources of ESG factors alone. There's like 2,500 alternative data sources that are known and being used across the buy side. And then there's all the internal data that's proliferated as platforms like Salesforce, or systems like the investment book of records on the buy side, or EMS and OMS platforms. They all leave behind these pools of data that need to be integrated into the 360 view of the customer, or the view of the portfolio. And the ways that data is served up is changing rapidly as well. It's also very fragmented. With traditional market data firms, they've typically launched companion APIs. They've got Excel add-ins. Everyone's Excel add-in is different. Every API is different. And new players in the space like Amazon and Snowflake, they've launched marketplaces. They tend to be kind of data lake-like. Expect them to add APIs to that as well, so people can kind of drink from those lakes, but that's yet to emerge properly. A new phrase that I've been coming across is this notion of reverse ETL. That's getting data out of lakes and back into internal end users. But the point here is that there are no real standards emerging out of this space. All the APIs, or most of the APIs, are in different formats. They don't share the same symbology. And end users really are quite ill-equipped to be able to combine that data without the help of a tech team. And then the final area of challenge and evolution is what's been going on with the various different Band-Aids that users have deployed to fill in the gap between those other challenges. Excel remains the most widely used solution, and despite the hazards this creates for the industry, it's going to continue to be used for a long time. Some of you might remember the London whale incident, a $6 billion Excel error. I don't think Excel was the only issue, but Excel was cited by the regulator as being a problem area. The problem is that Excel isn't a production system. There's no easy way to test the code. It can't really be deployed out to the cloud. in the same way as production code can, but clearly Excel is not going away. And there are similar issues with the business intelligence or the BI space, products like Tableau and Power BI. And then there's the browser that, I think 60% of users are using the Google Chrome browser. And it's not really built for business use. It's you search for things and you get advertised. Try and find an SEC filing using your browser. Try and cut and paste data from an HTML rendered page. So that the result of all of this is very brittle systems. They're riddled with control and compliance issues, which obviously is very important for financial services. So next I'll hand off to the team to kind of drill into these topics a bit deeper, hopefully with some real life examples and some solutions. So Sebastian, why don't you kick off with the topic of information overload?
Love to. And by the way, I know everyone is going to watch the recording of this, and it seems like we also need to publish like our little list of amazingly crazy trader desktop pictures, right? Like we need to start like an Insta feed for these things, right? Anyway, so our company does a lot of product development in this space, and we work all the way from data and analytics up through the pixels on the glass, as Tim was describing. But I thought for this topic of like information overload, I would survey the user experience group at my company, right? So what does it mean when people come to Expero and say, we'd like to use your platform, or we think we need some, something new built? Why would they do that? Why would they go to that expense? And it's often because of this issue. And we see a lot of common problems in the systems that are already out there. So I thought I'd just summarize a few of them, and I'm sure Ravi and Chuck will after they've seen these, either also be hanging their heads in shame or have some other insights. Information or topic number one is almost obvious from the name of the topic, which is huge cognitive load. So it's fun to laugh at those screens, but those screens are people, well compensated expert people trying to do their job. They're not just doing it for status, but maybe a little bit for status, but they're really doing a lot of difficult work. And what we have found is that most legacy applications just do a really bad job of balancing this like increasingly huge volume of data with the need for the users to be able to prioritize it and digest it, meaning there's only so much a human can do, even the smartest of humans. You can't take it all in. So we find we have to focus a lot on what the user is actually trying to do rather than just blasting them with data. Let's think about the journey they're on. One of the most important tricks we've seen that is just not very widely available in a lot of these applications, we call actions in context. A lot of these applications are what our head of product calls chore factories, meaning here's a big grid, knock yourself out, kid, figure out where your problem is. As opposed to what we should be able to do now, which is to say, we've given you a smart data visualization that helps highlight what you're looking for. Oh, you're overweight in this sector. Gosh, we have such a smart program. Why don't we tell you why you're overweight and immediately give you an option in context to go trade to solve that problem, or maybe look into it deeper. What are my options, right? They seem obvious when they're described that way, but most applications are just sort of a thinly veiled grid onto a huge database, inviting the user to do their best. It's absolutely ubiquitous, and it's not just handled through better UI, it's handled through understanding why someone is where they are. Once you've even helped them do that, the absolutely common pattern is that there's just too many tools. And Tim, you talked about this, right? The average user has 40 applications over. They're not sadists or masochists. They do it because they want the data from each of these applications. And each of these data vendors, each of these application vendors, God bless them, and even companies like represented here today, are really lots of little companies inside of them, aren't they, right? And so you end up with a little app from your FX feed, a little app from your options pricing, a little app for your market depth, a little app or a big app for your OMS. And there's no way to just put it all together except slogging through Excel and doing a lot of copy pasting. And so what we find is almost universally, if people can just put it in one place the way they want to do it, it's a huge win, even if the applications themselves remain the same. And I've thrown OpenFin and our own framework here for a reason, because that's half of the battle, is just getting these in one place and getting them to talk to each other. I know Chuck will have a lot more to say about that. And then, as I mentioned above, teams just often don't go the extra step to turn the data they've given you into an action you can go take, right? Hey, here's all my holdings. I need to go sell 100 of them and buy 300 of them to give you a better position. Too many of them say, well, I've run your solver. Here's your trades. Good luck. Because who knows what OMS you have, what EMS you have? How do you get all those trades over there and make it happen? And just there's a lot of need for that kind of glue to turn that data into real actions people can take. And once you've decided you want to do that, wow, are you stumped by the fact that there's just no consistency, right? Again, 40 apps means, and even if they're all well-meaning and they all have delightful user interfaces, it's very likely they'll all be different because there's no accounting for taste, and they're each aiming potentially for a different part of your persona, right? And so there's a real lack of like onboarding experience. You know, Tim, you talked about that custom Bloomberg terminal, and I often think, and I don't mean to drag Bloomberg on this, but you know, their usability is sort of a shame and a badge of honor, right? A lot of their usability was groundbreaking when it came out and maybe is not cutting edge anymore. But if you have your Bloomie and you know how to use it, that's a thing you know how to do. And it was expected that if you were going to sit on the desk, you were going to learn that thing, right? Well, some of those expectations are necessarily having to change. Maybe not about the king of the hill, but if I've got 100 apps I'm bringing on, surely I can't be expected to become an expert in all of them. It's actually, my interaction with them is now very different because they're less sovereign, they're less universal. I'm piecing my experience together. And many of them have an awful first-time user experience. They just expect you to be, you know, living in it like their developers do or like their most intense users do. So between the lack of that like first-time user experience and ease of use, and the fact that they've all re-implemented their own charts and blotters and time sliders and credit curves and VL calendars, it can be very confusing to figure out what you want to do. So often when we are building or modernizing products, we put a focus on that first-time user experience, and we try to get, you know, if we can, within a firm or a product suite, a lot of the data put into what we call common canvases. You know, if I've got 10 apps, but I want to see my trade reconstruction, how about you put all the data from all those 10 apps on one chart? That's what people really want. And final pattern I'll introduce here is less about like a particular UX pattern, but more of an observation around the kinds of users that are out there. These days, someone is more likely to be interested in spending 6 months becoming great at, say, Python programming than the intricacies of their Bloomberg terminal or of their, you know, FX trading app, because they're paid for their particular insights, they're paid to do complex things, and they're finding they can get more leverage that way. And so far, a lot of the sort of amateur programmers are off doing it on the side, just like they always have with Excel, right? Excel is not just about grids, it's about the formulas, right? They're doing it on the side, but, you know, and we've even done a few projects like this as a company where we've actually brought that notebook pattern, that classic like Python data science interaction pattern into production software with better visualization and better help around data access, so that those programmers aren't stuck out in the cold with their secret notebook trying to do something in the real system, but so that that interface is integrated. And I think that's bound to happen more and more as people entering the workforce are more interested in programming than they are in Excel or custom tooling. So that's kind of my overview. Guys, any thoughts on what you see in your space?
There's tons that you talked about, and I'll you know, we'll touch some of the same points, but the amount of data out there and the amount of information out there is just, you got to focus on what's relevant, and then how do you make it actionable? Like that's the key, because you can throw as much data as you want till you're blue in your face, but if you can't do anything with it, it's kind of meaningless. And
yeah,
if you can't do anything with it electronically, it's even further a waste of energy and resources. So we'll talk about that. I mean, you lined it up very well, but I completely agree. This is not a tech problem alone. This is how do you, it's sort of an awareness problem. How do you assimilate, how do you synthesize, and how do you action all of this intelligent, signals that are out there, but they are behind this glass, right? You can't do anything with it.
Yeah, if you remember, do you remember Microsoft had that little paperclip, kind of thing, that jump, run and help you.
We're aging ourselves.
They did away with that, but we kind of, I think the experience is still very fragmented. There's nothing tying all of that together or helping you construct a repeatable workflow. And then I think the event-driven piece is really critical, because a lot of what market participants do is they respond to something that's happened.
Correct.
How are you going to see across 8 screens something's just happened, and then immediately go into a mode of, okay, now I need to look at this and this and this and this, and follow that pattern of use. There's nothing, I don't think, really kind of orchestrating. It's very difficult to orchestrate that.
Yeah, we see a lot. We see a lot of that, where people are trying to move away from, sort of a generic tabular app where, you're kind of doing your own data mining, you're doing your own sort of, you're looking for information, right? So event happens, right? Then you go start digging in the pile of data or information that you have. And then you get to the answer, and you then kind of share along or sort of move a workflow along, right? We're seeing people trying to really invest in, exception-based workflow, where they're linking systems together and doing some of that, lookup, like, hey, this event has happened, right? There's a trade break. Let me show you, the 2 different systems and what the break is, so that you, the human, can use your brain and resolve it in a way that makes sense, right? So that so really transitioning into, let's have the robots do as much work as possible. Let's push people towards exception processing, but then let's give them all that context that they need to be able to process that efficiently and in a low risk way, right?
Yeah, that's a great kind of intro into your bit, Chuck, which is really talking about how you're making at your firm applications more interoperable, and how you're pulling that all together.
Yeah,
so it's different between the screens that you had, Sebastian, and Chuck's is he's gone vertical.
Yeah, no, I'm going vertical
with a microphone.
With a microphone.
Yeah. This is home office. This is home office stuff here, where you're zooming as well. Yeah, so application interoperability is a pretty big topic. I mean, we were just talking about sort of exception-based workflows, and using some like common UI to drive that. But the core drivers here are, it's around the proliferation of the applications, right? There are more applications. There were always a lot of applications. There are even more applications today, and that's really being driven by people want to use best of breed applications for for the different pieces of what they're doing. And maybe application is the wrong word here. They really want to use best of breed apps, like the same way that we do that on our phones. People kind of want to do that with their workflows. If someone has a really good company information page, like they want to use that one, right? They don't want to have to use the crappy one that's in whatever terminal product they have. They want to use the best company information page, where there's like key sellers and whatnot on there. And so there's a couple things in there. There's the sort of standards that are emerging, that are driving the ability for things to default interoperate. But then when you get into applications that are really part of a longer workflow, those applications really still need bespoke APIs and need to do sort of handshakes along the way. There needs to be like real integration there. So all this stuff sits on top of in our world, it sits on top of a bus. And it's, of course, yeah, oh, nice work. I didn't see the FDC3 on there. Yeah, this is the FDC3 riding on top of the bus. But not everything's the same when it comes to the bus. The first version of OpenFin back in 2010, right, had a bus in it, right? But it was a simple bus. It was it did topic-based, sort of promiscuous messaging. And then it did, secure directed sort of send receive stuff. And, that was actually fine when, people were integrating their own applications together. But really the use cases have evolved as companies have decided, hey, we want to be able to interoperate with other people's properties. They're starting to believe in this sort of open ecosystem of applications. And then of course we have all the existing applications, right? There's the legacy content, whether it's models sitting in Excel, whether it's someone doing side by side with some of their Python stuff. So we evolved from having this very simple basic bus into something quite a bit more complex, a real layered architecture. And you can see here we've got the IAB, the inter-application bus, kind of sitting at the center of it. Then there's a layer of RPC around that, and that allows you to sort of publish a really tight API. Someone can take that in as an NPM module. You can really do anything with that kind of model. But people also don't necessarily want to be sort of locked into doing interoperability through exposing APIs and having people consume them. They want to do like sort of more generic interoperability. And so we've got this interop bus that sits on top of it that's really focused on sharing context and intent. Those are some pretty awesomely loaded terms as part of FTC3, and FTC3 is a really great implementation of some core intents and some core context to be able to share around. But often what people are looking for is they want to be able to implement that standard. Or maybe they want to do something slightly different than the standard, extend that standard, and so they're going to build a custom API on top of interop, right? What they're really looking to do though is interop with a tighter ecosystem of applications than really the whole desktop. So they want to be able to show up and they want to be able to listen to everything, right? But then they want to share context in a way that's actually a little bit tighter than everything on the desktop. So we're not quite living in that wide open world of ecosystem. And so I start to call this stuff FTC3++. Because people want FTC3, but they want a little bit of a flavor of it, right? Whether they're doing, interoperability within their firm and they're creating standards for interoperability and mirroring some of what's going on with FTC3. But again, for their own internal use cases, that's kind of that like platform over on the left there with its own interop broker and sort of a closed set of visibility around it, right? But within that, right, the application can kind of show up, they can discover each other and they can do some interoperability. Going over to the right, we've got, platforms interacting with, applications that are outside of their world and really starting to have overlapping circles of information flow. And that's where we start to get into like, hey, the user wants to wire up applications together, right? And, I think we've all been trained by our phones, again, like, I should be able to just like go select the best of breed notes application or like grocery list application. And I'm gonna know that if it's a best of breed, like grocery list application, I'm gonna be able to share that grocery list with my family and they're gonna be able to put ice cream on it. And, yep. Whoever's at the store is gonna see that happening. And, all the different pieces that exist on my phone, like I just expect it to kind of work. And so we're really starting to live in that world where you can drop a small application onto a desktop, right? And it can maybe discover some data sources. It can leverage some of those common common UI components like notifications or search, right? And really start exposing things. So you've got you definitely have apps talking to apps, right? But then you've got to put some you got to put some UI on top of it. You got to put some stuff for the user to interact with. So that they can sort of drive some of these workflows that are transitioning from app to app to app. And again, it's super important to have, have that stuff be event driven, right? Or exception based, because that's that really drives that, drives that efficiency. And, of course, all of that needs to be context aware, right? Gone are the days where it's okay to, copy and paste QSIPs all over the place and maybe accidentally get the wrong one. And you're sort of off by a couple of months on on your maturity date, and people are finding the wrong bonds or whatever it is, right? So those kind of sort of empowering the user with the right information at the right time to make decisions across this complex growing set of applications that's really what we're seeing. Now, on the FDC3 side of things, like, context is pretty well, being invested in right now. We're a little bit earlier on app discoverability. People have huge catalogs of applications, but discovering that you need that application in your workflow, we're still early. People are building workflows still, not letting them appear through a collection of applications along the way.
That makes sense. I like how you, in a way, are kind of giving us permission here to not boil the whole ocean at once. Because I think if you consider some of the integration that's available through copy paste or alerts, like desktop alerts or Excel, it's very generic, right? It's like, well, you could integrate anything with these primitive tools. Whereas, yeah, what we're seeing with that action and context that I talked about, or common canvases, is only really makes sense in specific verticals, right? Even inside this capital market space. So if we're working somewhere and some analytics system has found potentially dangerous wire transfers, that context about those wire transfers needs to jump into like a CRM system or a corporate intelligence system. Now, who is it? How are they connected? What's their board of directors? Have we seen cases around this before? And then bring that into like maybe a case investigation tool to construct a SAR to send to the FBI, right? Like, that's a whole set of actions and contexts that keeps our money clean. And frankly, almost nothing to do with, except in the most generic workflow building sense, with where we are in other projects where it's like a trade break has happened. And now I need to see the books and the wire, and the reconciliations, or, the front office trader notes, or I need to jump from my PM system into my OMS. And right, it's just such a big universe. You can't hope to attack it in a truly generic way. We're only going to make progress with some specifics, right? Portfolios, investigations, transfers, right? I like that.
It feels like there's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing is we're seeing sort of like a cow paths approach to some of this stuff as well, where people want to look at, like, how are people using copy paste currently on their desktop? What applications are they copying from? What data are they copying? And where are they pasting that data, right? Because you can basically, by monitoring what's going on the desktops, you can see, hey, like, we should invest in interoperability between these two applications. And again, because you're doing client-side integrations, it's so cheap. It's really developer hours to get this stuff done. You've just got a prioritized list based on, like, how sensitive is that data, and how many times is this workflow happening where someone's chair swivel integrating these applications.
Totally.
So let's move on to the next topic. So we've pretty much solved the problem of apps, but what about the data? Because I think you mentioned QSIP, for example. You mentioned data almost in passing, but of course data is right in the middle of this. And Ravi, you've got some painful past experience of this, so it'd be great to kind of hear your vision and where you see us going on the data side of things.
Yeah, no, sure. So, a lot of the things that all of you've talked about are near and dear to me, writing sort of real-time systems, seeing the need, so just ground up need for interoperability. And it's electronic in nature. It's not start, stop, go somewhere else, do something. Interoperability is the heart of it. A lot of times, that event-driven system, that feedback loop has data at the heart of it, right? So if you go to the next slide, this is a sort of picture I picked up from Twitter. And I wanted to sort of line this up. There's a poem by T.S. Eliot called The Rock, and it has two sort of lines somewhere in the poem that go around something like this: where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge, and where is the knowledge we have lost in information? And this was written way back. It just happens to be, it's sort of very appropriate to sort of look at it in terms of, well, what is data, right? And so to me, the progression of these things just being data points or observations of facts, discrete things, but you sort of scroll to the right, and at what point in time do they start becoming meaningful? At what point in time do you start sort of seeing relationships? And at what point in time can you actually do something with it is at the heart of data, usage of data, and interoperability. Up until sort of knowledge, it's really you're trying to understand, which is great. You can explain things, but the value, right? Is in the futures. How do you apply it? And not apply it as in you send somebody a file and they can look at it and derive meaning, but how do you cut short that time where you give somebody that information and they can electronically do something with it right there? And a lot of the things that Chuck, you talked about, think that OpenFin and FDC3 are providing, the whole concept of event-driven framework. Sebastian, you talked about notifications. That's how all of this I see start coming together on the desktop. So if you go to the next slide, this is our default approach, right? You have lots and lots of data sources. You have to figure out what they are, but you have a lot of sources. You got to bring them in. You bring them into a lake, into a swamp, into a database, into whatever it is that you want. You have some non-trivial exercise to clean it up, to transform, to load the usual sort of ETL kind of process over there. Then you have another step where you're going to do some, post load aggregation, post load transformation. You're going to try and correlate that data to other data sets or other data elements. And then finally, you'll want to use it, right? So again, the usage could be through many ways, and I'll talk about this in a second. All of these along that entire flow have multiple challenges. If it were just two data sources and you said, hey, bring me that from Yahoo and that from Fidelity, great, no problem. Every day there's a new data source. The format, the size, and the shape is different. So there's a huge proliferation of data sources, and it doesn't scale linearly. Every time you got to bring in a data source, there is certain amount of work that has to be done, and it depends on what the source is and what the data is. And the second sort of bottleneck is, what's the format of data? You touched upon this reverse ETL concept. It's what drives the distinction for structured and unstructured data. So are you going to do schema on read? Are you going to do schema on write? How much information do you want up front? How much do you want to keep separate? Where is the metadata? How do I know what the data is? So it could be reams and tables and rows of data, but how do I know? Where's the meaning? Where's the semantics of the data? Then the third, which I think where Chuck was sort of slightly getting into is there aren't real good evolved data standards, right? Meaning, if I have to deal with financial services data, okay, we talk about QSIP, you can talk about red IDs, you can talk about tickers and so on and so forth. There's some amount of commonality. If you start talking transportation data, energy data, automotive data, that's a different domain. So, how do you interoperate? Because these domains are, at some point in time, if you step back far enough for decision making, there are correlations. If a trader is trying to take a decision on a portfolio allocation, maybe there is an element of automotive, energy, commodity data that's relevant. But how do you handle it and how do you bring it together is sort of huge opportunity for data, bringing in data into financial desktops. And then lastly, the fourth sort of challenge or an opportunity is there's too many endpoints. We've talked a lot about just desktops and how to visually get it, but there are APIs. You've got B2B use cases where there isn't a GUI. You've got systems talking to each other, like Stripe's trying to do a whole bunch of payments processing online. There's credit decisioning engine. You go online and you look for home loans, you pre-qualify. There's a lot of stuff happening online without a ton of GUI. That's happening through APIs. Then there's feeds. Then there's files, which people still use. And a lot of time goes in producing them and sending them. I haven't come across fax recently, but I've still seen emails with files, emails with dumps, emails with cut paste of data that are being sent to people, and then they do something with it, and they incorporate, and they kind of go through their whole ingestion, processing, using workflows on their own side. But a lot of these workflows are disjointed. You're doing point in time. I've gotten this value up to you. Now you do something else with it, right? So if you fast forward, go to the next slide. I think some of the concepts around the future of the desktop and how this data really becomes useful and something you can tap into is based on, can you discover it? Can you really find where your data is? Right? And so you talked about phones and do you know which app to use? How do you publish? How do data providers publish and let people know I am publishing this types of data? Where's that metadata come from? Once you know it's there, or something is out there, or someone is out there, they're selling or making available a certain amount of data, how do you access it? You don't want it in a file. You want it obviously electronically. So, so once you have that, well, can you now understand it? Does it have a meaning? Does it have semantics? Does it have a structure to it? And I think FDC3 has done some work with context data and intents, but it's very, very early. It's very preliminary. I think there's a lot more that should happen, that needs to happen. I think if you look at what ISDA did with their common domain model, I'm a big fan, and Sebastian and I, you've talked about this a lot. I think contextual domain models, object models, one for finance, one for automotive, one for energy, so on and so forth, are going to play a big role in how you bring it all together. And the pattern that to me that comes to mind is one of composability, right? So you're going to, I think the natural kind of evolution is going to be going away from point to point, widget-based solutions to step back. What's the capability? What are the connect points? Can you discover? Once you can discover, what can you automate? Can you put in low code there? Can you put in no code there? And instead of compile time, in terms of a lot of sort of bespoke build, now integrate after the fact, they become more discoverable, they become more electronic, they become more connectable at runtime, right? It's sort of decentralized. It's not just one person doing, or one team doing, or one firm doing, hey, I've solved all of these problems. I think the solution is distributed, but patterns like FDC3 and I think what OpenFin, Chuck, you guys are doing, enable that composability of solutions through data providers, through data standards, through API and discoverability, coming closer and closer together through newer technology. So the future is a lot more fun, but a lot of challenges right now to deal with. Sebastian, you deal with this all the time. I mean,
it's interesting. If you look at the FDC3 sort of OpenFin world, it's really helping a lot of applications hand off to each other.
Yeah.
And if you're inside one company, they could even potentially be much more tightly integrated because that company is willing to share, maybe even behind the scenes, some of the data. But certainly as an application builder, if I go join a bank on a journey to modernize a product, just handing data between different tools, handing intents and actions between tools on the desktop is not really enough. Users want to say, well, here's my price chart. I want the trades on it. And I don't care that you're not the trading system. Just give me the trades. I don't care how you get them, make them show up on this chart. And so I'm convinced, and Chuck, you hinted at this, I'd be curious what you think, like how we transition from application action, sharing to data sharing. And I know there's commercials and entitlements and privacy around all of it, but certainly as an application builder, our users don't care. Like, just give me the data, give me the data.
Yeah, certainly the thing that we see, again, because this goes to the composability of data sets or composability of the sort of different, the different bits that are on the desktop. When we're crossing company barriers with this stuff, the end user, of course, is licensed to see all the stuff. They're using the two applications. They have the data, right? And so, when we're crossing company barriers, the thing that really becomes important for the owners of the applications is, who is the application that I'm sharing this data with, right? And do I have a business relationship with that company? Do I trust them? Maybe for their application to do enhanced processing on your data set, even if it's happening on the client side, you need to have some framework in place so that you're comfortable, because you don't want your incredibly valuable data set that's so unique to your value prop. You don't want that leaking around. And so all this stuff is great, sometimes great in theory, but then you get into some of the details, and they're like, well, we have some really valuable car sales data that you'd of course love to see on that other chart, but like, who are those people that are charting, and are they going to do something nasty with my data? So there's some security elements here that also kind of layer in and impose some restrictions. Again, which is why having a strong secure bus is so critical for powering this stuff. Things that people can trust.
I think identity is going to play a big part in all of this, right? How do you identify who you are, and are you provisioned to use that data?
Yeah,
right?
that's
And I
true.
don't think we've solved the identity problem yet.
Not yet.
So it kind of feels like we're on a journey here, but at the end of the day, the end user is still going to be doing quite a lot of cutting and pasting and building, and and I think at the end of the day, users will do want to touch and feel the data, especially the most kind of creative and entrepreneurial. Not, I think we were imagining this world where we're fully federated and apps understand what each of the apps are doing, and they can communicate and pass context. But I think there's always going to be, a space for, the tools that we've kind of grown up with, and some new tools. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those. Some people, I remember a headline a few months ago that Python was the Excel killer. I actually don't think that's true, but certainly there's a lot of graduates, undergrads coming out of college with Python skills, and it certainly seems to be filling some of the gap. The great thing about Python over Excel is that you can read and work with almost any kind of data. You can do NLP with it. You can't do that with Excel, I don't think. You can automate repetitive tasks. It works very well with huge data sets, which is a big challenge. If you work with tick data, you can't get that data into Excel, right? You can audit, there's code, there's tools like Jupyter Hub and Jupyter Lab that help you collaborate. That's why data scientists tend to like it. And some really powerful open source libraries as well. So you can start to build standards around how things are calculated. You're reusing a lot of code that's open sourced and out there. And you can deploy it. I think you mentioned, Sebastian, you can deploy the code to a runtime solution, put it in production, put some controls around it. But I don't think I'm certainly not ready to give up on Excel. I've used Excel all my adult life. Lotus 1, 2, 3, I think, was where I started. And there's no way Microsoft is going to roll over. And you've seen Microsoft beef up the team, the product team on Excel. They're integrating powerful data handling tools like Power Query. I'm a big fan of Power Query. It's embedded into Excel. It allows you to do ETL on the data. You can hit an API, you can pass credentials, you can pivot the data, you can clean it, concord it, truncate it, split fields, do all kinds of stuff with it. The kind of stuff that you'd have to do, with a developer or in Python maybe, you can now do in Excel. So I'm not giving up on Excel, and I think it's only a matter of time before you start seeing more powerful machine learning and AI libraries showing up embedded into Excel as well. And I think Satya Nadella has kind of alluded to that.
Yeah, no,
so
I agree.
Let's talk about some of the other things on the desktop. I think Ravi, I think you might have mentioned, or someone mentioned, NoCode and LowCode.
Yeah,
this is definitely a kind of a movement, another kind of potential way of empowering the end user to stitch together data to build or prototype apps. There's a number of firms out there. I put 3 logos. There's probably 50 logos in this space now. Beacon is much more specialized around capital markets. It's an ex-Goldman team. And then there's more generic RPA type tools out there as well for automating workflows. But the common theme to these old and new tools, be they Excel or some of these low-code tools, is that they still require the data issue to be solved, right? Mm-hmm. So it all keeps going back to Ravi's topic, which is if the data doesn't connect together, if you haven't made decisions around whether you're going to build a data lake or you're going to do that on the fly, you know, I think there's still quite a lot of work to do. But I think in the meantime, these tools will continue to kind of evolve and try to be the glue that makes some of this work. And I don't know, it's maybe a question for Chuck, but I'm assuming that some of these tools should be able to communicate with the bus, right? So I think, can Excel push context into the bus? Or I'm sure you can for Beacon or UiPath.
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of interoperability back and forth to Excel still. Yeah. You know, it's still the place where people do a lot of data munging. You know, they you know, when they have a question that's a bit of a one-off, you know, the starting point is like, hey, let's get this data into something where I can, you know, make some sense of it. And, you know, that's where, you know, systems almost get prototyped really in that way. Yeah. Sometimes they never get built and they stay in Excel, but you know, a lot of the prototypes start there.
Yeah, and speaking as an application builder, I'll second that, which is I'd say half the time we go to a company and they say, we'd like your help, you know, building this product. A bunch of it's been prototyped in Excel, which of course drives some of our programmers crazy, because usually the guy who programs Excel is not like a professional programmer and the code's pretty messy. But I always emphasize, like, but this is the prototype that's like running the business, that's in business. The insights here are key. Our job is to turn it into a more usable, more deployable, more safe, high performant, all the things that we do as engineers. But I'll also say, Tim, I love that you mentioned this, because even as people who build software for a living, we like thinking of things as sort of a low code way of working. So if I go into a customer, I really don't want to go build a bunch of stuff all from scratch for each customer. I mean, you know, no one's willing to pay by the hour for that nonsense anyway, right? I want to be able to say, look, you have a grid and a chart and a data semantic problem and this analytic, and I've got pieces, right, that already handle those. So let's just start with that and put them together in like a low code way. That's really behind some of the Xpero connected analytics platform I mentioned, so that I can spend my effort on the interesting stuff, right? Yeah. Like your OMS is going to be tricky because you have an interesting auction protocol and traders are mean and you need a order entry ticket that's perfect. Like, let's really focus on that. That's worth absolutely making custom. But how about you do all this other stuff sort of out of the box? Yeah, it really informs the way we think about things as well.
And it's very agile, right? It's very nimble. You want plug and play. How many times do we build Power BI or you know, a number of different dashboards only to find that, well, we got to add yet another column, and now you go back, redo this, add just one column.
Yeah. Let me guess, you want to group by sector.
But I want to slice it differently, right? And those are just visualization problems. The more event problems to action things, to put in a trade, to change a portfolio, to buy, to sell, to do something. There's the verb involved. They are even more nuanced. And so I don't think Excel will go away. I don't think it will, you know, I don't think it should go away.
Not.
A huge, you know, very powerful tool that can allow you to plug and play and have, you know, a command center in the middle. And that's what we should kind of look to solve for as opposed to not.
So let me, with the 2 or 3 minutes we have left here before folks go to their next appointment, let me suggest a lightning round. Some of us have talked more about problems than solutions. We've said a few things. Just go on the record here. Let's just go from left to right, because that's how the slide is set up. What does the future, you know, actually look like? Let's make a quick prediction. What I'll say is maybe a little bit heterodox since we're supposed to be building the future as consultants here, but I actually think a lot of the chaos we talked about today is by design. There's a reason the desktop is massively chaotic, and it's because there's not one person that's got it all solved. And as good capitalists, we'd be terrified if it was, right? So I actually don't think it's going to get any simpler. There's just too much innovation in applications, data, and science, which is awesome. But I think what's going to happen is sort of a selection of the fittest. I don't think that, Chuck's marketing department is going to make OpenFin win because his marketing department is brilliant, which they are. They're lovely. Hi, if you're watching. Platforms like that, and I hope some of the things that my company builds, some of the things that Ravi's company is working on, will only win because they're doing these things like becoming discoverable and composable. And it's not through like a force of will, it's because the customers will just go away. If I'm a trader and I want your data and my bank's not willing to buy it for me, like eventually no one's going to buy it for me. So I think it's evolution. I think it's survival of the fittest, and where the people are going to have to cooperate. Chuck, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that survival of the fittest world means, app proliferation is here to stay, right? The desktop is getting more complex, not less complex. But we need it to be less complex. People need it to be less complex. And the way that they're going to do that is through integration with common UI components. The same way that we have, clean workflows on mobile devices that are, again, event-driven, so notification-driven, and the interoperability between those applications is going to become much more important, right? So we're going to be focused on, bringing best-of-breed components from outside, right? So we're going to be buying a lot more built applications, and we're going to be integrating them or expecting them to default integrate. And those things are also going to have to interact with, and leverage to the fullest, common UI components, paradigms around unified search, paradigms around, again, event-driven workflows. And that's really how we're going to manage the chaos, right? Because the number of applications is not going down.
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, I'll just a couple of things that I would kind of like to see. I want to see more progress on the browser. I don't think the browser's really kind of evolved. I think it will do. There's a really interesting startup just raised $100 million, Island.io. They look really interesting. They're going to do an enterprise browser, but I think there's a lot more. I think, Chuck, your firm could probably just own that space if you committed some time to it. And the other one I think Microsoft is going to, or someone is going to kind of put an AI or machine learning layer on top of all of this. I want that little kind of paperclip back. But I want it to really, kind of orchestrate my day across all these apps. When this thing happens over here, I want it to learn that then generally I go over here and do this and this and this. Maybe one day we'll get there. That's kind of out there.
Yeah, agreed. Ravi, parting thought?
Yeah, all those things, plus I think just decentralization, right? You'll pick best of the breed. They will play well in an open environment. They will be connected. They will be swappable. Products are more composable. And you get away from, hey, I'm building this for a bespoke thing. Like you'll have much more optionality. So black boxes, plug and play, API driven, composable kind of product. To me, that's just the future. And you can plug in AI. It just layers of pluggability.
Yeah, love it.
That's kind of how I think it goes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your thoughts this morning. And let's go make a pluggable, composable, decentralized, survival of the fittest, AI-driven, common canvassing, badass desktop. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.